I was born Brenda Jean Aoki in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, and Scots. I'm the eldest daughter of 6 kids. We all lived in one bedroom. Actually, the baby, whoever was the baby at the time, got to sleep with my folks, but other than that, we were all in one bedroom. It was my job as the eldest daughter to put everybody to sleep at night. And we had the 2 bunk beds and twin bed, kind of a, playpen like crib. And everybody would wait for a story, so I started to tell them stories, and pretty much how I put them to sleep at night. And that started, I guess, telling stories. Father's family also sat around and talked stories. And being Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, and Scots meant that I'm not exactly Asian, because Asian people tend to be, we're Japanese and proud of it. We're Chinese and definitely not Japanese. And so if you're mixed, you're not Asian. So we ended up spending a lot of time with Polynesian people. And there's a thing called talk stories. And that's basically what they just call hanging out, talk story. And I thought about it, that's true. That's what you do with friends. You talk story. You don't go through an agenda, you don't have like linear sequential dialogue. You talk story. My stories take a long time, I think, to develop, like Mermaid Meat, which I'm telling tonight. I think that was like inside me for about, 10, 15 years. I was a substitute teacher at this elementary school that had lost funding for its library. And during my break, I saw all these books being boxed up for the Goodwill. And I picked one up and it said, Tales from Around the World. And I saw one from Japan. It said, Mermaid Meat, The Secret to Immortality. And I wanted to, snitch the book. But then I thought, well, that's not right. They're trying to sell it, so, So I thought I'd ask permission. My break was over, went back. Went to ask the principal if I could take that book, and she goes, oh, it's already gone to the Goodwill. So I never got to read the story, but I always thought about that Mermaid Meat, The Secret to Immortality. That's just keeping your brain for a while. And then about 15 years later, several things happened. I had my baby, our son, and I learned that amniotic fluid, tears, blood, and sea salt are all about the same chemistry. And I was looking, the world was getting so tribal and so divisive. I was trying to find commonalities among people. And I noticed that all maritime countries have mermaids. And then knowing this about blood and tears and amniotic fluid and sea salt, I started to think, well, we're all little mermaids inside our mommy's bellies, so that makes sense that we have all these mermaid legends throughout the world. And so I developed this story with Kent Nagano. He's a conductor, and my husband scored it for full symphony, and the first time we performed it was with full symphony, and that's how it happened. For me, I was fascinated to find out that in Japan, it's the storyteller who's always been the heart of all drama. It started out with the shirabyoshi, the wandering women, handmaidens from the shrines who would tell stories and get alms for the shrines. And the shirabyoshi then became like the storytellers for the puppet theaters, which was the next thing. But there's always a storyteller, and there's puppeteers, but there's a storyteller telling the story. Then from the bunraku, the puppets, that went to the no, and there's still a storyteller, the waki. It's a storyteller who's weaving all the action on stage. He's supposed to be the audience's eye on stage. Then in the kabuki, there's still a storyteller. So then after the traditional stuff went away, even when they've had the first movies, they had a storyteller narrating for all the silent films. And so it's always been the Japanese tradition that there's been a storyteller. So it was amazing for me to find this out, because I never knew. I'm Brenda Jean from Salt Lake. And I was working in Los Angeles with some street gangs, and we're trying to figure it. And it's, you know, in a lot of poor pockets in this country. I mean, people are just killing each other over it. It's just, you know, too much pressure, I think, and whatever. But we had different gangs together, and my job was to try and get us to talk to each other. So I just opened it up to first voice, and I said, you know, as long as you tell us what's bothering you, you know, you have to speak in first voice. As long as you say, well, this happened to me, this is my experience, you can say whatever you want, but you have to speak in first voice. So gradually, over a course of a couple of weeks, everyone was telling their stories. This happened to me. My brother this, you know, my friend was at the liquor store and he got shot, and my sister was this. And gradually, as everybody heard each other's stories, the things just kind of dissolved away. And I just have to tell this one more story. I was in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, with an African-American storyteller, Robbie McCulley from New York City. She and I were staying together at the same, you know, hotel, and Robbie was going off to be with the black community, and I was going off to the Asian community. And unbeknownst to us, there was all this war in the projects between the Asians and the African-Americans. And we're finally hearing this because I'm with all the Asians and they're talking about all those bad black people. And she's with all the African Americans and they're talking about all those bad Asians and how they, you know, they're getting everything and we're not. And every night we come back and talk to each other at the hotel, and I'm like, Robbie, this place is getting ready for a riot. I can just feel it. And she goes, oh, I know it. And I said, I think we can do something. And she goes, what can we do? I said, we can tell stories. And she goes, okay, well, we're supposed to have a potluck the last night. And I said, yeah, us too. I said, let's have it at the same place and not tell them. So we had it at the same place. And all these African-American people came in. And all these Asians came in. They're all Vietnamese. And they saw each other, and you could have just, you know, it was so tense. You could have lit a match, and the whole thing would have blown up. So we just, you know, Robbie and I were the hostess. We told everybody, it's a potluck, sit down, let's start talking. Start eating, and everybody was eating in silence. And you have 60 people eating in silence. It was very strange, and everybody's kind of talking to each other. And one of the Vietnamese men was talking really loudly, you know, obviously angrily. The head of the African American group said, I heard that. And they had been speaking in Vietnamese. And so they looked up and they said, and the African American guy starts speaking back in Vietnamese. And turns out he's a vet and he learned Vietnamese. So then now they're yelling at each other in Vietnamese, and most of us don't know what they're saying. And then they kept talking in Vietnamese, and pretty soon, you know, they started to cry. And it was so fascinating, it was just so heartwarming to me, because that man who was head of the African American group was a vet, and he was holding all this anger. That anger was kind of spreading out, with being shared by everybody else for whatever reason. Same thing was happening with the Vietnamese people, but they could understand each other, and he never knew that. And they started to talk about the war, and pretty soon both sides were crying, and both sides realized, you know, how ridiculous it was to carry the war back over here. And they hadn't even realized they had carried the war back over here. It was just that they kind of hated each other. And at that potluck, as they gradually told their stories about what was happening to them on both sides of the war, just how bad war was, and as they got to tell their stories, it just all kind of, by the end of the thing, everybody was crying and eating. And when Robbie and I left, we just felt like, it's good to be a storyteller, isn't it?